You are listening to episode number 87 of the Everything Ham Radio podcast. In this episode, we talk with Vance, November 3, Victor Echo Mike, about traveling with ham radio gear. So stick around, y'all. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. My name is Curtis, my call sign is Kilo 5 Charlie Lima Mike, and I am your host for this podcast. This podcast is released every Thursday. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/everythingham radio. You can join the group at facebook.com/groups/everythingham radio. I'm on YouTube at youtube.com/everythingham radio and on Twitter at K5CLM. You can find the show notes of today's episode, which will have all the links that we're going to talk about, as well as some additional information at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/87. So in today's episode, like I said, we are talking with Vance Martin, November 3, Victor Echo Mike, and we are talking about traveling with your ham radio gear as well as operating once you're there. So we've got a lot of questions answered that I had about traveling. Not that I do a whole lot of it, but maybe some of those questions you have had and you do more traveling than I do. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get on to the interview with Vance. Hey everybody, we are here with Vance Martin, November 3, Victor Echo Mike, and we are going to talk about basically traveling with your ham radio and things you can do. So, Vance, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit further and tell us a little about yourself before we get started.
You bet. So Vance Martin is my name. November 3, Victor Echo Mike. That is a vanity call. My original call was a KC3 call. So I've only been licensed since I guess it was about April of 2014 when I first got licensed. So like a lot of people, I had been exposed to ham radio when I was young, but didn't really have time to get into it until I was a little bit older and had a real job with a real paycheck and so forth. So I do quite a bit of traveling for work, and that's what piqued my interest in ham radio again, just all the time I spent traveling and had this ham radio thing in the back of my mind. So I thought, hey, this might be something better to do than staring at hotel walls and looking through windshields for long drives and things like that. So it was actually my work travels that got me interested in ham radio to begin with, and it just kind of grew from there.
So you started at KC3, and you've only been licensed since 14. Wow, I got mine licensed in 95 and we were KC back then. We're like at KG, I think, now here in Five Land. Where are you from exactly?
I live it's considered central Pennsylvania. So if you're familiar with the area, it's south central PA, Lancaster County. So we're known for the Amish in our area, which, if you look at my little avatars that I use online, the Amish buggy with the antenna on it, that's why I use that. We always joke that Pennsylvania is Pittsburgh on one end, Philadelphia on the other, and Alabama in the middle. So it's very, very rural and country in the part of the state where I live. So that's probably why in Three Land we were only up to KC, because there's just not quite as many people in this neck of the woods as there are in some of the more populous areas.
It blows my mind sometimes. I'm thinking, we're like at KG, and you say you're licensed in 14. It just kind of blows my mind. I would think that there would be more up there. I mean, how far down? I don't have a map here looking at me right now, but how far down, or what areas does the 3 area cover?
3 is pretty much just Pennsylvania and Maryland, so it's not a huge area. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes more sense. And I'm thinking, 3 from Maine to to New York, but I guess not. So, I guess let's go ahead and get started in our topic of today, and that is traveling. And you said you got involved with ham because you're traveling. So, let's talk about some things that you need to do to get ready to travel, I guess you could say. What things should somebody think about when they're traveling, whether that be on an airplane or on in a rental car or something like that?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing that I've learned as I've traveled with my radio equipment is that early on I had in my mind that I had to somehow figure out how to put together the perfect traveling kit for radio stuff. But really what I realized is traveling with radio stuff is really no different from any other type of traveling, where what you pack needs to vary based on where you're going, how long you're going to be there, what things are going to be like once you get to the other end. So the biggest thing about traveling with radio is really being flexible and just spending a little bit of time planning ahead. I don't know too many people have figured out the perfect single kit that is ready to go and works for every situation. So that was really the biggest thing for me. Once I got past the hurdle of knowing what the perfect set of stuff was to travel and was willing to be a little bit more flexible, it got a lot easier to start packing. So really I just look at each trip and, how long am I going to be there and what am I planning on doing when I get on the other end? And that's really where I start. Now,
you're not talking about just packing an HT and battery charge. You're actually talking about a full blown HF station or what exactly?
Yep. Yeah. When I traveled, the first few work trips where I had to fly, when I first decided to take my radio stuff, it kind of grew on me all of a sudden. I said, well, I'll throw an HT in my bag. I said, well, I could probably fit a small mobile radio if I can figure out how to take a battery. And then I went, well, if I could fit a small mobile radio, there's no reason I couldn't fit my 857D. So really what ended up happening and what I pretty much always travel with now is a full HF station. And the 857D is the radio that I have that I travel with. So technically when I'm on the road, I have everything from 70 centimeters on up to 160. Now, I've never actually used 160 while traveling. Usually whatever antennas I end up traveling with, 80 meters is usually the most that I have with me.
So you actually pack a radio and antenna and all that with you?
Yep. And I have a couple different strategies for doing it. And that really evolved over time. When I'm traveling for short trips, I like to try to do it without too much luggage. So if I'm just going to be a couple days, so if I'm jumping on a plane to fly somewhere for a meeting and I'm only going to be there for a couple days, I can actually get my clothes and my HF station and everything I need in basically the carry-on and the personal item that the airline allows you to have. So if it's a small trip like that, essentially I'm stuffing everything in a backpack, and the trip, I don't know if everybody on the other end necessarily always appreciates it, but I'm usually pretty quick to leave out spare clothes in the interest of more room for radio stuff. So I tell people pants stay clean longer than you think. So if you're going anywhere less than a week, you can probably get away with one pair of pants. But when I'm doing it in a backpack, usually in that case, I'll stick just the radio body in my backpack, and usually either, depending on what I'm anticipating on the other end, either a small power supply or a small battery, like a lithium ion battery, or sometimes even just a kind of a jumper cable arrangement, which I'll touch on in a second. But I stick that stuff in the backpack with my clothes, and then my personal item, I actually take the buddy pole set. So I have one of the buddy pole deluxe kits, and everything packs down pretty nice. So I roll up to the airport with carrying my buddy pole bag as my personal item and my backpack on my shoulders as my carry-on bag, and that has everything I need. So when I'm doing that, the buddy pole is really only good up to 40 meters. if I am going to be there longer and I'm taking checked baggage, then obviously I can fit a little bit more equipment. But the jumper cables that I mentioned, that's one of the things that I really learned when you're packing ahead of time, is anticipating what your operating conditions are going to be on the other end. So if you're planning on just sitting in the hotel, a small power supply is great because you can just plug in there at the hotel. If you're going to be renting a car on the other end, that's where I actually carry a small, basically it's like jumper cables with a power pole jack on one end, and I will actually just use the rental car as my big generator. And that's actually what I do most commonly because it lets me travel with the least amount of stuff. But there are cases where if I'm not going to be in a rental car for one reason or another, where you can take a small battery. And batteries have gotten a little stranger to travel with, but the lithium iron batteries have made it pretty easy because they're so light. And TSA, they have specific rules around batteries. So when you're packing batteries, if you have, of course, they measure everything in watt hours because they don't know if you're traveling with, 3-volt or 12-volt batteries. So they just generically say you can travel with consumer batteries that are 100 watt hours or less, which works out to about an 8 amp hour battery. So if you're just powering a small radio, you can actually travel with 3 or 4 little 8 amp hour batteries if you want. They do allow you 2 larger batteries up to 160 amp hours, but they limit it to 2, and those are about a 13 amp hour battery. So really, if you want to power a full 100-watt rig and you're going to have to do it on battery, you can actually travel with a pair of like 12 or 13 amp hour batteries, and that'll power a full 100-watt rig for you on the other end. So that's kind of the stuff that I pack when I'm trying to pack light, essentially.
So do you basically do QRP while you're away, or do you do the full 100 watts?
It really depends on what my power situation is going to be. So if I know I'm going to be using the rental car for power or plugging in, then I'm just running the full 100 watts. But if I'm taking batteries, then I'll just dial the power in the rig back just to make the batteries last a little bit longer.
Okay. So you said you have the 857, is that what you said?
Yep. Yeah, the Yaesu 857D is the radio I travel with. So
is that a good radio for somebody that is on the go or that is traveling? Or what if you had whatever funds you needed to, what would your choice be to recommend to somebody that's doing what you're doing?
Yeah, if I had unlimited funds, and I often think of that, what really helps when traveling with radio is having your equipment being somewhat modular, so you can take what you need. And the 857D, it gets you your full 100 watts, but the only downside is for the size of radio, it is actually a little bit on the heavy side. So if you end up stuck in a long security line somewhere with that thing in your backpack, the weight can weigh you down. So if I had, unlimited funds, really it's hard to beat like the Elecraft radios and their matching amplifiers that go with them. And if you're going to be going somewhere where you can run the full 100 watts, you take your radio plus its amplifier. But if you're going somewhere with just the batteries, you can just leave the amplifier at home and run QRP off the batteries. So that's kind of an ideal situation. But I'm probably similar to a lot of people where I use the rig I have and I make it work.
So why don't you have like a go bag, I guess you could say, with all your radio equipment in it, and just have that where you can just grab it and go? Why put it in your luggage, so to speak?
Yeah, it's really something that I kind of fell into because I do so much traveling and portable operation. I had spent a lot of time trying to figure out a go bag like that. But really what I found out, because of the stuff that I need, most of my traveling is actually work related. So what I'm traveling with and what I can squeeze in a lot of times is dictated by what stuff I need to have for the work trip, which sometimes includes, some equipment. So I found giving myself the flexibility of not having a set go bag means I can, sit down, plan the business trip, get the equipment that I need kind of organized for that, and then I can be flexible to fit my radio stuff around. So that's where there's some things where traveling with checked baggage I've learned that are, I would say are probably good tips for folks that aren't regular travelers that you might not know. So even if I'm traveling with checked baggage, I still put my actual radio in my carry-on. I always keep that with me just because I'm, nervous about bags getting tossed around and things like that. But really what I start with when I'm packing for those trips is the stuff I need for work. And there are, if you do like Google searches for luggage, if you're pretty strategic, there are companies that make luggage that is, it's perfectly sized to the exact dimensions that TSA will allow you to travel with. I'm fortunate enough to have a couple Pelican cases because we haul our work equipment around. So I have several of those Pelican cases that are sized exactly for what TSA allows. And I used to put all my work stuff in, and I actually wrote some blog posts where I actually showed pictures of, how I packed all of my stuff, where I would, put some of my radio stuff in, power supplies and things like that, lay in a layer of foam, put some of my work equipment, and then I would kind of stick my clothes and stuff all around that other stuff. And I would get that box pretty much full, and it was always a little bit overweight, which for airlines, they don't really care if your bag's overweight because it just means they're going to get a little bit of extra money when you check in. Right. So it was, when I was initially packing that, because some of my work equipment was heavy, I was usually close to being overweight anyway. So until I put my clothes and everything else in, I was always, over the 50-pound mark, but under the 70-pound mark that you can get up to. And I was doing that for, I don't know, a year or more, just paying the overweight fee. It's, it depends on the airline, but it can be, an extra $100 when you're checking in. For me, my work was paying for it, so I just handed over the company credit card, so I was fortunate. But finally, after, I don't know, probably a year and a half, a TSA agent at the gate asked me, they said, "Hey, is what you have in here, is it like one big thing, or is it a bunch of smaller stuff that's just heavy?" And I said, "Oh, it's mostly a bunch of smaller stuff that's heavy." So she actually gave me the hint. She said, "Well, we charge $100 for an overweight bag up to 70 pounds. So if you can fit all your stuff in one checked bag, up to 70 pounds is going to cost you, the normal fee plus $100, so $125. She said, "But we let you check multiple bags at $25. So just check 2 bags and it'll be $50 and you can carry 100 pounds worth of stuff." So it was interesting where I found out that you can actually, the way just the airline pricing structures are set up, you can basically carry 70 pounds of stuff in one box for $125 or 100 pounds of stuff in 2 boxes for $50. So I actually started, when I had to check stuff, I just started carrying 2 and checking 2 boxes because then I could put some extra things. And that's when I started traveling with, some little bit larger antenna sizes and things like that, because I figured, hey, I've got this, extra 30 pounds of weight that I can kind of use up, so I might as well just throw in some extra things. But that's when I'm checking bags. Obviously, if I'm not going to check bags, then I pay closer attention to only having the things I absolutely need.
Right. All right, so let's take a quick break, and when we come back, let's continue our talk about this. This sounds like a perfect segue to our next segment, so stick around, y'all. We'll be right back. Do you have an old-fashioned voltage or amp meter hooked to your station? Are you looking to find something that has more bells and whistles? Check out the West Mountain Radio Power Check. The Power Check has 8 display modes, including voltage, current flow in either direction, wattage, and amp hours, and will measure from 0 to 60 volts with 40 amps continuous load. It is accurate to within 10 millivolts and 10 milliamps. It has a backlit graphics LCD that will display data in digital, analog, and bar graph formats. You can even monitor your battery backup with a programmable gas gauge. The non-volatile memory stores more than 100,000 data points without power. That's nearly 2.5 months worth of data at 1 point per minute. It has a USB computer interface for configuration and data download, and you can program it to sound an alarm for overcurrent, over and under voltage, and amp hours. The software that comes with it allows you to program every aspect of the Power Check operation, such as data logging rate, display formats, and alarm conditions. You can display current, voltage, wattage, and amp hours in real time. It has an integrated charting software that automatically collects and displays data. All the data can be downloaded and stored for later analysis. If this sounds like something you would really like, make sure you head on over to everythinghamradio.com/WMR and check it out. And if you do, and enter the code EH-SUMMER at checkout, you will get $50 off of your purchase. Normally the Power Check runs $184.95. If you enter the coupon code EH-SUMMER, you get a $50 discount, and that comes to $134.95. You can't beat it. The offer expires September 30th, 2017, so make sure you head on over and get yours before the coupon expires. Also, don't forget to pick up your free USB port monitor with your purchase. Again, that's everythinghamradio.com/WMR for more information. Hey y'all, we are back with Vance Martin. Once again, his call sign is November 3 Victor Echo Mike, and we are talking about traveling with your ham radio equipment. So we touched a little bit in the last segment about flying and stuff like that. And you kind of mentioned, you answered one of my questions already. You don't have to check your bags. So have you had any issues with the equipment that you carry onto the plane rather than checking?
So I've never, in my opinion, I would say no, I've never had any issues. But really it depends how much traveling you do. I like to tell people, especially if they don't travel regularly, and I actually get asked about traveling with equipment somewhat often, just because I've shared posts on Twitter and stuff from airports with all my gear packed up and stuff like that. But the only times that I've had what you might consider issues weren't even really issues because of radio stuff. It was just what I call the normal protocol. So I like to preface these types of questions when people ask me about it with the thing that doesn't always necessarily sound friendly, but I tell people you have to remember when you're going through airport security that you're not special. You're just another person in the line with a bunch of weird stuff going through the machines, and they see way weirder stuff than anything a ham radio guy is going to carry. If you do enough traveling, you see camera equipment and music equipment, and there are technicians that travel to do troubleshooting on unique pieces of equipment, and they're carrying oscilloscopes. I mean, there is so much strange stuff going through TSA that ham radio, is not really that weird. It's a small box of electronics as far as they're concerned. So really getting through TSA with the radio equipment is really like going through TSA with any other piece of electronics. And something I like to point out, TSA does have a website where you can type stuff in and it'll actually tell you, yes, you can take that, or no, you can't. And they actually specifically have ham radio equipment on their list. So TSA as an organization is aware of ham radio, and they say, yep, bring it. It's good to go. The only thing you have to remember is that the same rules apply to it as apply to any electronics. So when you're going through the metal detector, your radio needs to come out of its bag and go in its own little plastic bin to go through the X-ray. And that's the place where if you're going to have any kind of hurdle, you might. And I'd say probably maybe 1 or 2 times out of 10 that I travel, my radio will go through on the X-ray machine. I'll see the person look at it, and the expression on their face says, well, that looks like a lot of electronic stuff. I don't know what that is. So they pull it out in the little thing in the back. The rest of your bags come through. They take it down. They swab it to make sure there's no, whatever they check for with their swabs, and then they hand it back to you. So I've had that happen a number of times, but that only adds, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 minutes to your time getting through security. Probably the most interesting thing, it's unfortunately not a horror story where I got pulled aside and they wanted to know what I was planning on doing. It was actually a funny story. It got pulled out. The girl at the looking at the little X-ray machine must have been new, because I could see her asking a lot of questions. And the one guy, like, his eyes lit up. Like she was like, what is this? And his eyes lit up, and because she tagged it, he had to pull it out and go through the thing. But and I feel bad because I don't remember the guy's call sign, but it turned out he was a ham. So I was like, that was perfect. I thought that was awesome. He's like, oh, this is great. He said, where are you going? What are you doing? So for all the things that people worry might happen, to TSA, it's just another piece of electronic. They're going to go through their normal protocol. And as long as you don't call extra attention to yourself, it just gets processed like anything else. Usually when I hear the horror stories, it's because when somebody got to that point and the radio gets pulled aside, they get real defensive. And you'll hear people saying things like, well, I have an FCC license and that entitles me to, when you're in the TSA line, you're not entitled to anything. If they want to pull your piece of electronics aside, they'll pull it aside. They'll swab it to make sure it's not explosive, and they'll hand it back to you. And, 10 minutes later, you're sitting at the gate waiting to get on the plane. So it's actually pretty uneventful. I've probably had more things happen with rental cars than I actually have in TSA. And it's not necessarily because of issues with the rental car company. It's because of that little jumper arrangement that I talked about. So if I'm using the rental car as my generator, basically, I'll either be, during Napoda, I had done a lot of Napoda activations. I do a lot of worldwide flora and fauna stuff. So I'll pretty often be in a park. I'll have the car pulled over in a parking area, and I'll have the hood popped so that I can have the jumper cables on the battery. And invariably during an activation, I'll have several people stop and ask me if I'm having car trouble. So I actually draw more attention in rental cars. The only other thing that is unique with getting through TSA that I like to remind people, you probably don't want to put, so like I travel with a buddy pole. What I normally use as a guy to hold the buddy pole in place so the wind doesn't blow it down is basically one of those ground screws like you would use to tie your dog out back. So it's looks like a giant wine corkscrew that you screw into the ground. Well, obviously it's not a good idea to take something like that through security at an airport. So don't take stakes through security, obviously. So that's the other challenge once you get on the other end, because there are certain things that you don't want to take. But if you use good sense, your radios will go right through TSA. Your wiring and harnesses, as long as you keep everything tidy. If you carry cables, keep them neatly wrapped so it's obvious that it's, just a wrapped bundle of cables. If you have a mess of wires in your bag, that's going to draw attention more than if you have, a handful of nice tightly bundled wires. So
I know the last time I flew, and granted this was a long time ago, actually I think before 9/11, but I know you had to turn on your electronics and stuff like that. Do they still require that? And if so, do you have to turn on your HF radios to show that it's actually a working piece of equipment?
Nope, they don't make you turn anything on anymore. And it's actually, and I think that is probably just because of how prevalent electronics have become now. Pretty much everybody going through security, and I won't say everybody, but probably 70% of people going through security at an airport, because there's so many business travelers are carrying laptops. And if they made everybody power up a laptop, it would just be ridiculous. So they don't make you turn things on anymore. They just say for large. They never really defined large. They just kind of generically said for large electronics, they just have to go through in their own bin. Now, this is something that did just recently change. I used to tell people that your main HF rig is probably your only thing big enough to qualify as large. So if you take it out, you can leave, power supply, antenna analyzers, anything else you might have can stay in. The rig itself is usually the only thing that causes any flags for TSA. But they did recently make an announcement that they're going to also start making you put like tablets, larger tablets and things like that in their own bin. So you can either be proactive and also pull out power supplies and put in their own bin if you happen to be traveling with one. But really what I found with TSA anymore, you can really just go through, and if there's anything that they see, they'll just grab it and say, hey, we want to look closer at this. So if you have your stuff neatly packed and you don't want to try to tear it all apart, just send it through. It'll either go through or it won't, and if it doesn't, it only adds, a 5 or 10 minute delay while they pull it off the belt and look through it. And that applies to even non-radio stuff. There's a lot of things that people think might be in a gray area. They always talk about traveling with the liquids and all that kind of stuff. But I'm pretty much inclined anymore to just leave everything in my backpack aside from my laptop and my HF rig. And most of the time it just flies right through. And, once in a blue moon, they see something that causes a flag and they just pull it off the belt and look through. And, 3 or 4 minutes later, you're on your way like normal.
Yeah. So just basically remember to be civilized when you're going through there, and you should be fine.
Yep.
So let's switch gears kind of a little bit and talk about like rental cars. You said you operate with them. The power you said you get from I'm guessing little alligator clips and the wire and some kind of whatever your power connection is on the other end. Do you ever have any issues with rental companies allowing that? I mean, is there anything in their policies that say you can't do something like that?
Well, I tend to be a ask forgiveness, not permission type of person. But most of the time, rental car companies aren't really concerned about that type of thing, as long as you're not doing anything that would like modify the vehicle. They don't really care if you're plugging stuff in. So rental cars are actually I consider them to be a treasure trove of gadgets for portable ham radio. And so I'll probably have to explain that a little bit. So obviously if you're flying somewhere, odds are you're going to end up with a rental car on the other end. So yeah, for power, if I know I'm going to be doing a WWFF activation, basically what I have is a heavy zip cord with alligator clips on the end that I can clamp onto the battery, and then power pole plugs on the other end. And I usually carry, and I think you do some work with West Mountain Radio. I actually use West Mountain Radio rig runners, so I'll plug the power from the rental car's battery into a little rig runner that I throw in the bag, and then that gives me, one jack for the radio, a couple jacks to charge my phone, which I use for logging and stuff like that. So I have the little U versions that have the USB charger. So that makes that really handy. So that's the power side. The only catch you sometimes have, first, you don't always know exactly what you're going to get. So once in a while, I'll get a rental car that is just awful for RF9 noise levels. So in those cases, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just shut the car off run off the battery, and then, every 30 minutes or so, just turn the car back on, let it run for a few minutes to juice the battery back up, and then shut it off. So that's probably the biggest hurdle on that end. As far as the rental cars being a treasure trove, so when I talked about getting through TSA, and I said don't travel with your big spikes and stuff like that to guy your mass off with, rental cars come with this really cool counterweighting mechanism to keep your antennas from tipping over. Everybody else calls it a spare tire. I call it an antenna counterweight. So I'll actually take the spare tire out of the rental car, put it underneath the tripod for my buddy pole, and then I'd put a bungee cord in my buddy pole kit, and then I'll just wrap a bungee cord around the bottom of the mast, loop it into one of the lug nut holes in the spare tire, and I have a counterweight to keep the thing from wanting to tip. The other thing that rental cars can be great for is emergency shelter. So I found out the hard way when you travel down towards, like Florida, down in the Everglades is where I was, where I ran into, there's a certain time of night where the mosquitoes come out in swarms thicker than I have ever seen. So in addition to being power and counterweight for the antenna once you're there, it's also a great place to hide when the swarms of mosquitoes come out for their 20-minute binge in the evening.
Yeah, know all about those here in Texas. So do you just operate well, I don't say mobile, but do you only operate like stationary mobile, or do you have a antenna or something that you can bring along to operate mobile as well?
I normally only do stationary. Once in a blue moon, and there's not really any rhyme or reason to it, if I'm feeling really inclined, I will take just a small mag mount, but I don't use that for my HF stuff. If I'm doing that, I'll just use that to throw a mag mount and use my HT just so I can, chat on local repeaters and stuff while I'm driving around. But I don't do that too often. I find most of my operating when I'm traveling for work is either stationary set up in a park or from a hotel, or more often here of late, I've actually been doing some camping. So obviously not when I've flown somewhere, but if I'm driving somewhere, I pretty often actually travel with a tent now. I was able to convince my company that a campsite's cheaper than a hotel. So when I want to drive somewhere and camp, they're all on board. So it's usually stationary operating that I do.
Cool. Well, that is, again, a perfect segue into our next segment. We're doing pretty good with this. So stick around, y'all. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about operating while you're traveling. So stick around. All right. So real quick, y'all, I'm not going to break too much into this, but I want to mention some things that I've got going on. If you haven't seen them on Facebook or on Twitter, I've started making these customizable wood wall plates. I've made a few of them, made a couple of them for the guys over at the Ham Radio 360 podcast. I've made a couple of them for some customers that have purchased from me. And right now is the perfect time to do it. If you are looking for something to hang in your shack that looks nice, this is something you can look into. Okay. Basically, it is a wood plaque. It's approximately 11.5 inches by 6 inches or so, and it's totally customizable. You can have your name on it, you can have your name and your call sign, you can have just your call sign on it, as well as a personalized logo on the side. If you have something that you like, say you like wolves or something, you can have a picture of a wolf on there possibly. If you don't have anything particular that you care for, I have a couple of stock ones that I've already made. For example, the antenna tower that is on my podcast logo. I can cut that into it, which you've seen pictures of those. If you would like one with the Ham Radio 360 logo on it, I can do that as well. So there's several of them that I can do, and they're totally customizable however you want them. The last one that I did that just got shipped, I believe it was Wednesday, maybe Tuesday, something like that, to a gentleman, and his was totally customizable. It had his call sign on it, and they had a customizable logo on it. So if that's something that you're looking into, make sure you check out my swag store. Also, something I just got pictures put up on, I did a desktop nameplate type thing with your call sign in it. I gave those away back in episode number 50. I gave 3 of them away. I didn't take pictures of them, stupid me, but I have pictures of them now. I made one with my call sign, and I have it sitting here in front of me, and it turned out pretty good. So if you would like something like this, both of them are $15 right now. The wall plaque is a special launch sale for a limited time only of 50% off. And it's going for $15 right now. Both of them are $15, but the call plaque is for a limited time only. So it's $15 plus shipping. And if you want something like that, check out the swag store. You can find that at everythinghamradio.com/swag store, all one word, SWAGSTORE. I have those. I have the mouse pad with the podcast logo on it, drink coasters, coffee mugs, and several other things. So check out my swag store, and if you find something like, hit me up on it. If you want to do one of these wood plaques, send me an email with what you're looking for and make sure that I can do it. And if so, then you can head on over to the swag store website and purchase those, and I will get it made up and shipped out. Typically around a 3, maybe 4 day turnaround is all that it is. So if this is something you're looking for, please check out my swag store and help me continue to do what I love, and that is this podcast and helping all of y'all learn something along with me. So let's go ahead and get back to the interview with Vance. Hey y'all, we are back with Vance Martin, a November 3 Victor Echo Mike, and we are talking about traveling with your equipment for amateur radio. So in this segment, let's kind of talk about operating while you are out and about or in your hotel or stuff like that. So you said you use the buddy pole. Is there anything else that you use?
Yep. Yeah, I have a couple different sort of what I would call standard arrangements that I use. So if I'm going somewhere and I've traveled light because I'm only going to be there for a few days, that's when I'm using, the HF rig and the buddy pole. So if I'm going to be doing like a park activation or something like that, then my operating usually consists of standing up the buddy pole, hooking up my fancy little jumper cable to the battery at the rental car, or using a small battery if I brought one along, and then setting up. And pretty often I'm doing like park activations, so I'm usually doing my CQ POTA calls when I'm actually operating. If I've gone somewhere where I'm taking checked baggage, I actually have a couple different things that I also carry with me. So one of those things, and being, I guess you could say, frugally minded, a lot of this stuff is stuff that I've kind of made and hobbled together myself. But if I'm taking checked baggage, it's always nice to be able to have full-size antennas, because at the end of the day, a full-size dipole will always work better than pretty much anything else that you could travel with. So what I usually carry in that case is basically a feed point box that I built for myself, which is essentially just a BNC connector and then a couple lugs on the side of the box. But I actually set that up almost like an inverted V fan dipole. So I have an element for 40 and an element for 20 that I put perpendicular to each other. So from the box, you can almost picture it like basically like two triangles kind of perpendicular to each other. And if I've gone somewhere where there are no trees, which happens sometimes when you're, traveling all over the country, then I'll just use my buddy pole mast to hold that feed point box up in the air. But if I've gone somewhere that has any type of tree to it, then I'll take a small section of rope, just a little paracord, because that's easy stuff to put in the luggage, and I'll throw the paracord up over a tree, and then I just have an eye hook in the top of the box, and then I use that to operate. And that's when I can take that with me, because I have checked baggage and can have all that extra wire and the little bit of extra weight. That's what I probably have the most luck with, getting contacts a little further away and a little more reliably. So that's probably what I would say the most fun, because it's the less hassle, the least amount of hassle. Once I get that up in the air, call CQ and start getting answers. The thing that's probably the most challenging when operating while traveling is operating from hotels. And you hear people talk about operating from hotels occasionally, but I don't think you hear about it that often, because I think everybody that tries it always ends up going one of several routes. They either get frustrated and they stop, or they just resign themselves to QRP with small antennas, knowing that they may or may not make contacts. Because what it boils down to, if you're actually going to operate from your hotel, the first hurdle is most hotels, for health and safety reasons, don't have windows that open. So if you're operating from your hotel room, you're usually stuck with the antenna being in the room with you. So that it is a hurdle right off the bat. And I've found from personal experience that hotels are the worst type of building ever designed for RFI, not so much because of how hotels are built, but because of who and what is in them. I mean, if you figure you walk down the hall every 10 feet, there's another room with another set of USB chargers and cell phone chargers and TVs, and there's just so much junk making noise in hotels that if you can't get the antenna outside, you're pretty much stuck. So I am that guy that calls the front desk and asks weird questions. I used to early on try to explain it, but it was another thing where eventually it dawned on me that, I'm in their mind, I'm really not that special. They get asked weirder questions. So, so if I am going to be staying in a hotel, I will pretty often just call ahead and say, first, do you have balconies? If so, I want a room with a balcony, because then I can get my antenna outside. If they don't, then I say, do you have any terrace level rooms, with openings right to the outside at ground level? If they don't have that, then I'll ask them, do you have windows that open? And that's the one that raises eyebrows, because everybody, especially if it's a big 60-story hotel and you're asking them if they have windows that open, they're kind of going, oh, what's this guy planning on doing? So if you can get one of those things, a balcony or an opening window, then you can actually have some luck in a hotel. But the way most modern hotels are designed, if you go to any of your standard chains, you're probably not going to find those. But if you're willing to stay at a less reputable place and just be willing to really use a lot of hot water on your laundry when you get home, you can usually find somewhere that's old enough to have opening windows. But the traveling that I enjoy the most is when I don't have to fly and I can drive somewhere. And that's, I mentioned in the last segment, where I've started doing some camping on business trips. And that has just been a complete blast. Like any business, businesses, they absorb the costs that they have to. But if you tell them, hey, on this business trip, there's this way I can save some money, they're usually pretty quick to say, yeah, go ahead. So when I called my boss and said, hey, if instead of getting hotel rooms for, $150, $200 a night, would you be cool with me getting a campsite for $12 a night? He said, well, yeah, go ahead. So that's what has become a lot of fun, is when I do have the opportunity to go somewhere that's close enough to drive to, is throwing the tent in the trunk and then setting up my mast. And in those cases, if I'm driving my own car, I have a taller mast that I take with me. But I do the same thing. I stand that mast up, put that antenna arrangement on the top of the mast, and then I sit in my tent and play radio.
So what about maybe like a hotel roof or something like that? Do you ever have access to something like that?
Once in a while, you'll have luck with something like that. I've never personally been able to get access clean to a roof, but some of the hotels that I've been at, when you get in like the big cities, like into New York City and Boston and stuff like that, they will pretty often have outdoor pools that are like, halfway up. So you can go to the pool deck and set up your stuff there and play for a couple hours. And that can be fun too. Because anytime you're somewhere like that, in addition to just, getting to play radio instead of staring at hotel walls, there's usually other people around, and that usually generates some interesting conversation. Most hams I know like to talk, and I'm no different. So when I'm out and about, I actually get a little bit of a kick out of being that guy doing that weird thing. And usually I get, one or two kind of fun conversations with random strangers that are interested and bold enough to come over and ask me what I'm up to.
Do you ever have any problem with hotel security or police officers stopping by when you're working in a campground or a park or anything like that?
I've never had issues, and that's one of those things where, again, I feel a lot of it is the strategy you take in and how you approach it. So I usually, I usually don't go to a desk and say, "Hey, can I do this?" I usually tell them what I'd like to do, but I try to be very, I guess friendly about it is the best way to describe it. So like at hotels, if I want to try to set up at the pool, I'll usually just ask, "Hey, can I talk to somebody from security? I'd like to play around with some of my radio stuff, but I want to make sure it's okay to set up." And usually if you approach it that way, they say, "Oh yeah, no problem. They're down the hall. Just let them know where you want to go." In parks, I found that usually when I'm checking in, just as you make the small talk while they're, filling out your information, if you're camping or something like that, they usually put down your car's license plate and stuff. Usually in the small talk there, I'll just sort of sneak into the small talk. "Oh yeah, while I'm here, I'm going to be doing whatever work stuff, and I'm a ham radio guy, so I'll probably play around with some of my radio stuff. So you might see something strange sticking out of my tent," and they, "Oh, okay, that's cool." The only issues are when people, it kind of goes back to that, almost like being humble, not feeling like you're entitled to something, because if you act humble, then people see that. If you walk in and say, "I'm a ham radio operator and this is what I'm going to do and I have an FCC license," you turn people off. But if you're just friendly, let them know what you're up to, and then usually everybody's pretty easygoing is what I've found.
Yeah. So what modes do you normally work when you're gone? Do you try to stick with like CW, or do you do voice or digital, or what?
I do a little bit of everything. My first few trips, I was pretty much strictly voice. It wasn't until probably the last half year that I actually learned CW and got comfortable enough with it to start making some contacts. So more recently, I've been doing mostly voice, and then each trip, really just in the interest of getting some practice. I always tell myself I'm not going to leave without making at least one CW contact. So I usually do mostly voice, and then I'll spend a little bit of time doing CWs so that I get 3 or 4 CW contacts in. I'd like to do more of that. So as I get better, my plan is to do more CW. I think I'm up to a whopping 7 words per minute now. but it's fun. I've been enjoying it. And once in a while, I will do a little bit of digital modes, usually PSK31 if I do anything digital. And that usually coincides with the trips that are longer, where I'm taking both pieces of luggage and I have space to pack some extra stuff in. Then I'll usually throw in like a Signal link or something like that, and then do a little bit of PSK once I get where I'm going.
Cool. So I think one more question here before we wrap it up. This is kind of a two-part question, okay? What is the farthest contact you've ever made while traveling, and what's the most memorable?
Oh boy, those are loaded. Well, the second one's probably loaded. The farthest contact was probably not anything super impressive, but into Austria. So usually, especially when I'm doing Parks on the Air, Worldwide Flora and Fauna stuff, just because that program's so popular in Europe, usually you can get a few European stations, but it's normally the closer ones, Spain or something like that. But I've had a couple into Germany and Austria, so those are probably the furthest I've had while portable. As far as memorable, it was probably, there's one that sticks out to me that I always go back to, because it was it was one of those that it wasn't especially far, it wasn't really that fancy, but it stuck with me because it almost didn't happen. And it was during the National Parks on the Air program. I was doing a long business trip and was activating a whole bunch of parks on the way. And there's a handful of people, over the years you end up talking to the same people regularly. During Napoda, there was a lot of call signs you would hear all the time because they were really active chasers. So there's a guy up in Massachusetts who's actually in one of the areas that I travel to regularly, but we still haven't gotten to have a face-to-face, but Nick is his name. And I was set up at one of the parks in, I don't even remember at this point, I think it might have been Fredericksburg in Spotsylvania, and I had just shut off the radio and was getting ready to tear stuff down, and I actually saw a post on Facebook where Nick said, "Oh, sorry, I missed you." So I quick fired the radio back up and actually gave him a call and was able to get the contact. And then it was like the floodgates opened. It was just kind of funny. It was like, I was ready to walk out the door and just made that one contact with somebody that I knew from having several contacts with him. And then all of a sudden that opened the floodgates of a whole bunch of additional people coming in. So it was just kind of fun. It was one of those kind of, try to sneak one more in, and then all of a sudden you're on the end of another pile up.
Yep. Well, thank you very much, Vance, for coming on. Where can somebody find you, or your blog post that you've been mentioning?
Just my call sign, so n3vem.com, and I'm fairly active on Instagram and Twitter. I usually, post some stuff. Kind of the routine that I end up following is while I'm working on things, I'll usually end up throwing some posts on Instagram and Twitter, and then when I have time to actually write about it properly, I'll do a full blog post. So that's probably the easiest place to find me. Obviously QRZ and kind of all the standard stuff for anybody that would want to reach out to me. And grab contact and email from any of those places. Awesome.
Very good. Well, thank you again for coming on. I really enjoyed this. Might have to get you back on sometime and maybe talk about the worldwide flower or was it flora and fauna? Is that what you said?
Yep. Yeah. That's something I'd love to do. So if once you get into your new schedule and stuff, if you're looking to fill a time slot, I'd love to talk about it. It's a program I've had a lot of fun with. So
awesome. Yeah, I might have to set something up here when we get off here. So, Vance, again, thank you very much. And y'all can find them at n3vem.com, and there will be a link in the show notes of today's episode as well as a couple other links and stuff that we've talked about. So, I guess 73 to you, sir.
Yep, have a good one.
All right, have a good one. All right, y'all, so that pretty much wraps it up for this episode. Once again, I want to thank Vance for coming on and talking to us today about traveling with your ham radio. You can check out his website. Again, it's w3vem.com. And there was a link in the show notes to his website, as well as some of the other links we've talked about in this episode in the show notes at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/87. So, like I said, that pretty much wraps it up. I want to thank each and every one of those that have helped me in many different ways. I just can't thank y'all enough for all y'all's continued support and understand. Left before I switch over to a twice a month. Of course, I mentioned this last episode, but I would mention again, and with that, with my work and with trying to start up this sign business, I'm having to cut back somewhere, and I can't cut back on my family because they're number one, and along added income of my hopefully sign business. So that's why I'm cutting back, so I can spend more time with them, so I can spend more time trying to provide for them and for my wife and myself. So starting on episode number 89, we'll be going to a twice a month schedule. It'll be on Thursdays still, but it'll just be twice a month. So it'll be on the 12th, I believe. It will be that episode. I've actually talked with Vance, and he's going to come back and talk to us again. Laura, talk about that, which, from what I remember, it's pretty interesting, and it's along the last year. So I think that's a lot of what people changed to after the National Parks on the Air event was over with. But so yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. Again, if you want to order a custom-made sign with your name or call sign, a logo, a saying, anything like that, there is a limited time offer of 50% off of your purchase, and that will be going away here pretty soon. So if you want to get your custom made, make sure you do that. Get it. If I can do it, then you can go over and actually purchase it. Check out the swag store. And I guess that's pretty much it. So with that, I'm going to bid y'all 73, and we will talk next week.